You are going to be investigating the negative effects of industrialization. Take a look at these two pictures. The one on the left are young girls in a cotton mill in 1911. The one on the right is a boy lost his arm running a saw in a factory in 1909. Negative effects of industrialization. During the late 1800s, the rapid growth of industry, cities, and immigration had severe consequences on American society. As industrialization gripped America, businesses and industries began to take advantage of employees. Most employees had few rights or protections against unregulated corporations. Businesses became wealthy while many employees had to endure unsafe working conditions, long hours, low pay, and child labor. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Americans began demanding for the government to make efforts to help the poor and control the size and power of big business. The result was a chain of reform efforts known as the Progressive Movement. The Progressive Movement was a series of efforts made to improve the quality of life for Americans in response to rapid industrialization. A focus of the progressive movement was addressing the major negative effects of industrialization. During this time period, 10 to 12-hour work days were common, often with 6-day work weeks. The hours were harsh and exhausting. In addition, pay was low. Men usually received $1 to $1.50 a day, which is roughly equivalent to $25 to $35 in today's money. While workers barely made enough money to get by, businesses were getting rich from their labor. Also, there were few laws or safety regulations to protect workers, which created unsafe working conditions for most. Many industries exploited child labor. Factories hired children because they could pay them less money than adults. As work conditions worsened, public concern began to grow. The following excerpt from the autobiography of Oscar Neebe highlights the hazardous work conditions the progressive movement worked to prevent. I worked in a factory where they made oil cans and tea caddies. This was the first place where I saw children from 8 to 12 years old work like slaves, working on machine. Most every day, it happened that a finger or hand was cut off. But what did it matter? They were paid off and sent home, and others would take their places. I believe that children working in factories has, for the last 20 years, made more cripples than the war with the South. And the cut off fingers and mangled bodies brought gold to the monopolies and manufacturers. How often has the sweat of a poor man or child paid for the silk dress of a woman of these men whose only desire is to have lots of fun and a good time? Labor unions. In response to worsening labor conditions during industrialization, many people began to demand better treatment for workers. Labor unions, also called unions or organized labor, were groups of people that joined together to gain higher wages, shorter work days, and improved safety conditions. The major theme of labor unions is strength in numbers. If one person fought for expanded rights, businesses would often fire the individual or simply ignore them. However, if a large group of workers all demanded more rights, the business had more motivation to listen. Businesses frequently grew frustrated with labor unions. Business owners believed unions were interfering with their right to run the company as they wanted. Business owners especially despised strikes. Strikes were an effective method used by unions to gain workers' rights. During a strike, union members would refuse to work, which caused the company to lose money because production was slowed or halted. Union members hoped the strike would force company officials to give in to the workers' demands. Usually, union members would form picket lines, which involved making signs and parading around in front of a business to gain public attention. In 1886, several labor unions across the country united to create a national labor union called the American Federation of Labor. Unions were still organized at local levels, but at the same time would become a member of the American Federal of Labor. The AFL maintained more power than local unions because it contained more members. The AFL worked with political leaders to create laws that improved workplace safety. The AFL also made major contributions to the standard 8-hour workday movement. Samuel Gompers, the leader of the AFL, always insisted the AFL was not against business. They simply wanted to ensure workers' rights were respected. Today, roughly 12% of workers in America belong to a labor union. As treatment of workers improved over the years, less people saw it necessary to join a union. Most business owners today make efforts to treat workers well. Labor unions are still an important part of business and industry. Unions continue to hold a vital role in ensuring workers' rights are considered when laws are being developed in Congress. Labor unions. Strikers confronted by state militia in Massachusetts, 1910. The Homestead Strike. In 1892, workers at the Homestead Steelworks, located just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, decided to go on strike in response to the mill's plan to reduce workers' pay. The mill refused to meet the workers' demands. The strike escalated and eventually turned violent. The event highlighted the struggles between labor unions and business owners in the late 1800s. The Homestead Steel Mill was owned by Andrew Carnegie. As steel prices dropped, Carnegie decided to reduce pay for his workers. In response, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers called a strike. When word spread that the mill planned to hire replacement workers, the striking employees took over the mill. The mill hired guards to regain the property and protect the new employees. As the guards arrived on boats along a nearby river, strikers resisted their advance. Shots were fired, resulting in a 13-hour battle in which more than 30 men were killed. Eventually, the governor sent in the state militia to end the fighting. After 4 months, most of the strikers gave up. Some of the strikers accepted the pay cut, but most never regained their jobs at the steel mill. The Homestead strike failed. Most of the workers left the union, leaving it powerless. Public support for labor unions gradually decreased because of the violence. Many business owners became more determined to resist unions as a result of the Homestead strike. The Homestead Strike. The following excerpt from Myron Stowell recalls the violent fighting between the strikers at the mill and approaching Pinkerton agent guards on boats. When Murray had fallen, Joseph Stoic stooped to render assistance, and he himself was struck on the upper lip by a bullet, which dropped him dead by the side of his fallen companion. In the meantime, Henry Striegel, who had retreated to the top of the hill and was firing at the men on the boat, fell over. He died in a few moments. On the boat, the men who seemed to be leading the armed party was shot and fell to the deck. After he had been removed to the inside, the men on the boat retreated into covered barges. Firing ceased on both sides. Then came a conference between the leaders on the shore and a stout middle-aged man on the boat, who seemed to be a leader. Said the mill worker, "On behalf of 5,000 men, I beg of you to leave here at once. I don't know who you are, nor from whence you came, But I do know that you have no business here, and if you remain, there will be more bloodshed. The leader on the boat said, Men, we are Pinkerton detectives. We were sent here to take possession of this property and to guard it for the company. We don't wish to shed blood, but we are determined to go up there and shall do so. If you men don't withdraw, we will mow every one of you down. And the picture shows the mob attacking guards at the Homestead strike.